My name is Vicki Limbrunska with Argyle. It's great to have everyone joining us today. I just have a few administrative details to share with you, and then I will turn things over to our esteemed speakers for today's session. First, we'd like to thank Metric Insights for their partnership with today's event. They've been wonderful thought leadership partner to Argyle and are committed to providing you with valuable content and a great overall experience. So thank you again, Metric Insights. We appreciate you joining us today. Also, we welcome you to stay connected to today's event, during today's event. For those of you who are active tweeters, please follow us on Twitter at Argyle Exec Forum. And I also want to just take a moment to touch on our content neutrality policy, which we've curated based on the feedback we've received over the years from our members. Argyle is very proud and protective of this policy as it reflects our commitment to ensure the neutrality and overall value of all the content presented at our events. We've worked closely with our speaking faculty for today to ensure that you receive a set of balanced and neutral viewpoints throughout the session, and we appreciate our members' support of this policy. And last of certainly not least, we really want you to submit your questions throughout this session. So please submit all questions that come up during today's event into the chat section of the interface. And following the panel discussion, we have set aside time for our speakers to weigh in on those questions. And so before we move to the panel portion of this event, I would like to welcome Marius Moscovici, CEO of Metric Insights, for his introductory presentation. Welcome, Marius. Over to you.
Thank you, Vicki. So before we get into the panel discussion, I wanted to give you a little bit of a framework for how we think about BI governance and what makes BI governance effective. So if you think about your BI governance landscape, irrespective of what solution you put in place, what process you put in place, you really have to serve three different sets of constituencies. It's not just a monolithic problem. And those constituencies are the consumers of information, right? People that come in to look at dashboards, look at reports, answer questions. They usually don't want to spend a lot of time there. They're just trying to get to the bottom of a particular issue and use it in the day-to-day business decision making. You need to serve the publishers of content. Those are the folks that are the analysts who are going to be spending all of their days building out analytics and reports and dashboards and want to share that broadly with the organization. And then you, of course, have to support the data governance team, and that organization that says, here are the governing principles we want to apply. Here's how a governance should work. Here's the processes that need to be in place. And all three of these pieces of this puzzle need to fit together neatly in order to have a solution that actually works. So I'm going to talk a little bit about the needs of these various constituencies, and then give you some concrete examples of the types of functionality that you need to implement in order to support those needs. So first, let's talk about the consumers of content. So here, think about an executive in your organization, or really anyone who is just has a light touch with information, but when they go to use that information, it's critical to making the right decision. So what do they care about? Well, this individual will care about, can they trust the information? Is this dashboard that I'm looking at really have the right information that I'm looking for? Is the data up to date? Am I looking at data that was refreshed yesterday, or is this like stale data where I shouldn't really be basing my decision off of it? And then, of course, for any given visualization, they want to know, what are the standardized metrics that this visualization showing me? Is this showing me the gross revenue based on the definition that I know is our enterprise definition, or is this just something that some developer created that maybe is inconsistent with how I look at it elsewhere? And then what other content do I have? So if I've seen something interesting here and I want to go look at something else, what else is also measuring the same enterprise KPI? These are very, very common questions that the consumer needs to understand when they're looking at the information in order to have proper context, right? And so an example of this, if you look at this screen grab here, and the bottom is like a Tableau dashboard, right? And I'm looking at the Tableau dashboard, that gives me the actual content. But around that is some of this contextual governance information. So first of all, in the top right-hand corner, I see that this was refreshed, at that particular date and time. So I know how fresh the information is. If I look at the top, I should know that, oh, there's a problem with the refresh, and there's the folks that are responsible for doing those refreshes letting me know that that's going to be updated soon. So that informs my process around how I treat the data. And then if you look at that pop-up with a little a green checkbox, I should be able to come in and look and say, well, how do I, who is this certified? Is this content that I can trust? And then more importantly, who certified it? So who's the business owner? Who's the technical owner? Who are the data stewards? Who are the folks that I can hold accountable, so that if I see something that doesn't make sense, I should be able to click on one of those names or something and immediately reach out to those folks and find out what's going on, ask a question, etc. And then any information that the governance team wishes to share with me around this that might affect the handling of this information needs to be presented to me as well. So, it doesn't contain PII, as examples here, or maybe the data classification, hey, this contains sensitive information. So I need to be mindful about how it's used, who's the owning organization. These are examples, of course. The point is, whatever you need to communicate to this consumer in order for them to use the information correctly should be available from a governance perspective. And then if you look on the top left-hand section, right above the top of that dashboard, you can see that there's also these enterprise KPIs this is associated with. So it's telling me that that this dashboard contains enterprise churn, gross churn, and finance. So I need to be able to have that kind of information presented somehow, and then be able to go in and see, well, what's the definition of enterprise churn? What does it mean? What does the data governance team deem to be this? Is this what I expect it to be? And again, who are the owners of this definition? So if I disagree with this, I know who to reach out to. And finally, I should have some mechanism by which, if I'm interested in enterprise churn and I want to learn more, what are all the other, how do I get to all the other visualizations that have also been associated with the certified KPI? So all of this context, however you do it, just needs to be wrapped around the visualization. And now as a consumer, then I can go in and I can make the right decision about how I'm going to use this information. So next, let's look at the BI publisher. Again, the analyst, this is the person who could be a data scientist, could be somebody within business or IT who's going in and they want to do one of two things. They either are going to be publishing new content, maybe there's a question they want to answer, and the first thing they probably want to know is, well, has this question been answered before? Right? So is there already a dashboard that somebody in my team or maybe some other team has created that answers this, so I don't have to do this work, I can just go use that, I don't reinvent the wheel. And if not, then the next question that's asked is, what are the data sets that I should be using to answer my question? Right? So I can go build the dashboard off of the right data that has been certified, that is deemed correct, and then I'm not wasting my time building things that are going to be incorrect. And then once I've built it, how do I put it someplace and promote it in such a way that now other folks that are coming in that need this content are going to be able to find it and are going to be able to know that they're using it in the right way. So these are sort of the needs of that persona. And if we look at that, so the kinds of things you need to be able to do, of course, we'll start with search there. So as this analyst, I need to be able to come in and say, I'm going to create something on sales analysis, see all the things that have been created on sales analysis, irrespective of what tool they're in. I shouldn't really even need to care about whether it's a Tableau or Power BI or Cognos or something a data scientist created. I want to find all those assets so I can kind of look through them in a smart way and figure out, does something already exist to answer my question? So search is sort of the global search in particular is the first place that I've got to go. Then once I found something, maybe I find this dashboard and it's interesting to me, the next question to sort of answer my hypothesis about whether I can use this content or not is I need to be able to discover lineage, right? So I need to know, well, for this particular dashboard, what is it based off of? Is it based off of the things in the data warehouse that I know contain the right data, or is this based on something completely different that maybe is not relevant to what I need to create? So having that ability to understand this particular content is sourced from the following tables, maybe downstream lineage, how it's used in other parts of the application, very important as well. So that's key contextual information. And then finally, if I didn't find what I needed in terms of the existing visualizations, I need to be able to, again, using some kind of search functionality, I need to be able to find, what are all the published data sets? What are the ones that are certified? What columns do they contain? again, tags and things like that. So I know this particular data set contains the enterprise churn. It's been deemed to be compliant with that enterprise churn metric that I want to actually report on. Then I know I can have confidence that this is a data set that I can go build my Tableau visualization or my Power BI report off of, and have it be consistent with all the other reporting in this area. So that's an example of what the analyst needs. And then finally, once I've created my object, now I need to have a way, in some mechanism, to publish it into the ecosystem where people will find it. So some portal has to exist within my enterprise where I can put that visualization, I can tag it appropriately, I can add descriptions, metadata, whatever other governance metadata can be added to it. If certification needs to be applied, I can apply the proper certification workflow to do that. And then people will be able to find it. So then moving to the third persona, the data governance individual, the folks that are establishing these processes, they have a different set of concerns. They are looking at, how do we establish the right certification process? And here it's important to understand that one size does not fit all, right? You might have a very different certification process for your board reporting that executives are using, and it's going to be a make or break situation if there's any kind of problems with it, versus maybe a expense reporting that's going to accounts payables individual, right? They're both important, but different levels of importance, different certification processes might be required to support those. And then how do you create visibility around the process so that if there are different individuals that need to be doing the certification, how is that managed? How is that guided process that effectively supports what data governance should be all about? And then finally, the kinds of things data governance team needs to establish, what are the right enterprise KPIs, and then know that once you've established a KPI, once you've defined it, you've done the hard work to make sure the business is in alignment with it, now that you can map that to all the content that actually supports it, right? So that it can be used effectively. It's not just some definition sitting off in some metadata tool where nobody's actually looking at it. So as an example there, you need to think about some kind of a workflow management process, right? So that you can have your visualizations. The visualizations can move between different stages. That workflow may be very simple for visualizations that are less critical, and might be multiple stages with lots of reviews, with lots of individuals for those things that are of the highest sensitivity in an organization. But there has to be some mechanism by which those things can be moved through a process. The right amount metadata can be tagged to it, whether it's PI, sensitivity, other things, and then it can be ultimately published and certified as is appropriate, and then only then becomes visible to the consumers of the information. Also, need to have a way to capture someplace all of these enterprise KPIs, the definitions, the stewards, and you need to have a way to then associate that information with the visualizations that your users will be consuming. So that, again, going back to the consumer use case, you've enabled that consumer to look at a visualization and know, yeah, this actually is the visualization that contains enterprise churn in it, and the definition's been certified, and it's gone through a governance process, so that I know I can trust it and move on from it. So once again, just to wrap up, 3 pieces of the puzzle here, all very important. No matter, irrespective of technology or process or the specifics of your governance solution, I would maintain to you that you must absolutely support the needs of all 3 of these key constituencies in a coherent way in any solution that is going to be effective as a BI governance solution. And with that, I'm going to turn it back over to Vicky.
Excellent kickoff. And as we move into our panel discussion, I would like to introduce our panel moderator, Mike Smitherman. Mike is the VP of Sales and Marketing at Metric Insights. Welcome, Mike. I'm going to turn the floor over to you.
Yeah, thanks, Vicky, and thanks, Marius, for the presentation. And I'd like to introduce the rest of our panelists here as well. So we've got them popping up on the webcams there. So we have Greg Zelo from a company called Veeco, who's the CIO over there. Hi, Greg. Thanks for joining us. And also Abhishek Rapuriti, I think I've pronounced it roughly right, who's an analytics lead over at PayPal, previously with Deloitte. And so we'd like to sort of open up the discussion a little bit and sort of bring some of what Marius was talking about, I guess, into the real world with you guys and what your experience is in your organizations. And maybe let's start by going around the table here a little bit and talking about sort of how you define BI governance in your organizations and what it means to you in your organizations, and perhaps some of the sort of benefits you see of having BI governance in place. And maybe Greg, we could kick it off with you.
Yeah, sure. So for me, it's about striking the right balance, right? You want to have speed and agility, and that's empowering self-service and the users to create some of the reports or dashboards that go out. But at the same time, you've got to have governance in place, otherwise there won't be any confidence in the metrics and what's being analyzed. So it's it's a little bit of both, and finding that happy place, that Goldilocks in the middle.
Yeah, absolutely. And Abby, what about with yourself over at PayPal and what you've experienced back at Deloitte?
I would like to just add to what Greg mentioned and say that for us, BI governance is like defining the common ground, right? Because a lot of teams need to come together in order to deliver the BI analytics projects. And that's where there is a need to have a set of standards around process, around definitions, around ownership, etc. So that's where data governance defines and continuously updates those standards to make sure we are all speaking the same common language, that we can use the work from each other and build on top of it. Rather than redoing things. So it helps ensure, one, to get things done and not go around in circles and keep repeating the same thing endlessly just because some of the other part keeps falling off. And the second is to make sure the end product is useful indeed, that the business can trust those the output that comes from BI analytics and can use it to take business decisions and implement those things. And it gives various benefits around trust, efficiency, accountability, etc.
Greg, I'm curious, you mentioned sort of hitting that Goldilocks level. Can you talk a little bit more about sort of how you sort of put that into practice? What are really the things that you do to make sure that you do achieve that balance?
Well, one is going around their organization and making sure you have the right ownership and accountability defined. And I would say sometimes the owner of the data may not be the accountable person who makes sure the data quality is there or the output is created correctly. So kind of having that heat map and that understanding of who's in what position. And then, I can talk, if we pivot to kind of our journey and kind of where we started and lessons learned and where we are. We started with originally, 3,000 reports that were largely, end user defined. And this led to different interpretations of the KPIs and a lack of confidence in the output. So over a period of time, years, we slowly removed access, right? So fewer people having control of generation. Then we began to slowly retire the overall number of reports. And that had another benefit of it actually cut back on the demand on the IT team, because a lot of times we were getting brought in to chase reporting issues, and it actually turned out that it was a data calculation issue initiated by an untrained power user, right? And then rolling out, a set standard of KPI validated reports by IT, and then training and letting a smaller subset of group be those power users in the business that can then further create reports, with the one constraint that there's a set of subtotals that need to tie from the user created reports back to the KPIs in the IT created reports, so that we have that confidence that we're talking about the same thing.
Is there anything you could share sort of from the experience at PayPal associated with what you've seen as sort of your journey and what you found to be effective?
So BI governance is not super critical when your team is small and when everybody understands each other's role and can get things done. But very soon as the team scales up, it becomes more and more important to have the right governance in place. And you need to scale BI governance as your team and your processes and your data volume scales, right? And that's the tricky part, because often what happens is, in an ideal world, we would want to scale it in time, but almost always we scale it reactively. right? That we start feeling the pain points of not having it, and then we go back to the boardroom and go back to a whiteboard and say that what are we missing? And most often one of the things is governance, and then we define some processes around implementing it, and it takes a higher cost to implement at that later stage. So as we have incrementally built it, there have been multifaceted benefits around it, right? The core ones I would like to focus on, as I said previously, is around trust. It's very important that at the end of the BI analytics process, whatever reports and dashboards we generate, the end user should find the insights actionable and should find them trustworthy to act upon them, right? And not feel like, are you really sure about this number, because there is a big business decision on me and I don't want to get it wrong just because the number had some data issue or data quality issue. So that being the key part, we want to make sure that our BI analysts understand that, hey, you are building a KPI or a business relevant output, and not think of your job as you took data from some database, you applied some formula on top of it, whatever came the output, you just spit it out. You didn't even took a moment to understand what the output is. Does it make sense? What context, what story does it tell? And is this story worth telling or worth acting upon, right? So you need to take back and understand those things, which means you need to be more trustworthy, which means there should be a governance process, because this trust has to be shared across multiple parties, right? And everybody needs to have a clear role and definition of how they play into it. The next part is around efficiency, because as I mentioned, lack of governance has often led us to go in circles and work on the same thing, debugging, troubleshooting most of the time, just on very small things, sometimes often close to a release. Yeah, and then it again sets back the timeline, which is also a trust issue, that can the team deliver on a planned timeline. So to avoid going in circles, it helps to have the right layer of governance. And lastly, it has been very pivotal in setting up accountability across various teams, right? It not only helps us fix issues sooner, because now we exactly know who needs to do what, but it also over a long term helps us create and sustain a very strong sense of ownership of their own areas, which has been a strong morale boost across the team.
As you think about sort of the structure of your organization, and Marius, I know we kind of see this, we hear a lot of talk about sort of data governance, right? And less talk, I think, about BI and analytics governance, right? And I know that they're very closely linked. I know, Marius, we see a lot of obviously synergies, but kind of differences there. What's your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I mean, for us, we see that there's a lot of interplay there, right? Because oftentimes people start with just the data piece, right? They're just thinking about, how do I certify the data? How do I make sure that the data is accurate? But then they kind of don't really think about the second part of the puzzle, which is, if you don't look at how you might have that particular business term, gross revenue, perfectly defined and beautifully, ingested properly through ETL, tagged and so forth, unless you've sort of proliferated that all the way through into the reporting layer where it's being used in a consistent way, right? Then you haven't really accomplished anything, because it's very easy in the reports to to use some slightly different criteria against that table or something of that nature. So I think having those work in concert for us, I think, has been pretty critical.
Yeah, I'm curious though, Greg. Kind of how do you approach it? Do you start with sort of the data, or do you start with the analytics as you think about governance, or is it kind of a workflow that encompasses both?
Right. I mean, I can talk about past lives. It did start with the data, because that was a huge problem on both the customer material and then the vendor. Kind of those were the starting points, and then it evolved into others, and then shifted over to analytics. Where I work right now, it's all one and the same. So data, analytics, and business process are stitched into the same owners across the organization, whether we're making an analytics change or whether we're making a business process change in Salesforce or SAP.
I would exactly echo Greg's sentiments that if there is none, then data has to be the starting point. But very soon you want to reach a point where all three of them are working in tandem, because it's just something like the weakest link will determine how fragile your process is.
Mm-hmm.
So I guess as we think about fragility then, and sort of the processes that you've put in place, I guess what are some of the the pitfalls that you've run into, I guess, as it relates to governance. I guess, the ultimate goal is it's adding benefit, right? But on the flip side, I'm guessing things like too much governance could maybe be detrimental to what we're trying to achieve. So curious sort of what you've learned as you've been through these journeys as it relates to that.
Sure, I can go first
Maybe
on that. Sure. So the biggest mistake, and particularly let's focus on the last year, as it has been a very dramatic year for almost all of us, was to realize that while we all love the idea of lowering the cost, increasing ROI, right, and they have been like forever favorites. Often people, including me, tend to end up over optimizing things, right? Leaving little room for flexibility. And that can become a huge issue whenever there is a disruption, either in the business model, or it is in the industry, or something global like a pandemic. And at that point, you realize that you should have kept some room for agility and resilience and all those things, but it's a later thought. So you have to adapt to that, right? So one lesson going forward is that, of course, low cost and high ROI are great goals, but also keep agility and resilience in perspective, because it's very important, as learned in 2020, and I think it applies for 21 and years going forward as well, is for businesses to be agile. And that means the BI analytics team needs to be agile, right? Whatever path you have, suddenly a disruption might come and you might have to reorient your processes, shift your resources, redefine things, and you should be adaptive to that, right? Of course, it will take some effort, but it shouldn't become a process of like starting back from zero, right? Because that would be a huge cost and drain to the business. Then you will become a liability rather than being a valuable asset to the business. So now we think cautiously about the areas we want to optimize on, and we think of when we think of overall optimization, we keep agility as one of our top 3 goals.
And I guess where do you draw the line then? Is it related to the data that you're thinking about? The secure data, the sensitive data has to be highly governed, and everything else is sort of the Wild West, or how do you draw that line between agility and process?
Sure. For us, it's mainly based on how popular is the need for the data and how important is the data for the business. So based on that, we divide it into different tiers. And for example, the top tier would have a lot of data quality processes, a lot of aggregation process, and even if the SLA from one system to another misses, alerts would go on. Whereas for the lower tiers, it might be still an ad hoc process that, there is, people do governance as and when they find time around it, right? But it's not business critical.
Got it. Greg, your side, I guess, pitfalls that you've experienced?
Pitfalls, and then I can go back to the previous topic for a second as well. Okay. So again, I said, the pitfall for us is really getting that app of, the owners versus those that are accountable, and sometimes they're different people, right? I use an example in my organization where the equipment master might be owned by manufacturing and operations, but the accountable team for data accuracy is field services. So we've got to have that partnership. In terms of the other topic where we were talking about, data governance and then analytics governance, and then I added in, the business process side of the house. I stitched them all together, and I use an example, right? We're looking to grow revenue, we're looking to grow margin, 2 key goals of the company, right? And I may be working with somebody in the business that says, well, I've got a very high inventory levels in Asia in my spare parts business, and we need to drive that down, and that's going to impact margin, right, and improve it, and it's going to impact customer sat and cycle times. So before I go into my supply chain system and start figuring out hunt sequences and fulfillment depots and all those types of things, I back up and say, okay, what's the metric? How are we going to define success, and how are we going to measure that if we make these process changes and systematic changes to our supply chain, we're going to know the result and the benefit of the change we put in place, right? And we start with that design up front and understanding how the data is going to flow, and then we make the systematic changes. And then, as we deploy those changes, we also have the analytics to measure whether our changes are successful. So it is all stitched together in one process.
So Greg, are you saying you even, as part of the project, before you even approve the project to proceed forward, you're looking for those metrics and how they're going to be measured?
Absolutely. We look for the metrics, right? And quantifiable metrics. We don't want to just make systematic changes, right? And that kind of like separates the herd, right? Because the projects that have the biggest benefit get to the top of the list and get the capacity, right? And then when the change gets deployed into production, I'm making a change in supply chain operations, fulfillment rates, hunt sequences, whatever it might be. I also have the analytics there to measure success and capture, did I actually get the benefits that I had projected, right? It's not thought of as an afterthought of, how are we going to report on this down the line, right?
Yeah. I think something we see as well, Marius, is when people talk about governance, they immediately sort of steer towards security, right? And making things locked down. And back to Abby's comment around agility, right? Putting that to one side and in the goal of making things secure. But oftentimes, I think you're trying to balance this. Have this balancing act between security and discoverable content that people can use. Maybe chat to that a little bit.
Yeah, and I think Greg kind of put his finger on that when you talked about the metrics there. That you've got to have it's really about generating value. And right, if you think about governance in its purest form, it's about stewardship, right? If you've got anything you're governing is sort of a resource that you want to make the best out of. So the resources of your time. And specifically the time of your analytics team to build solutions. I mean, that is so scarce. That's probably one of the most expensive resources available in the enterprise. And so having the proper processes in place to make sure that content is discoverable, that you're measuring the effectiveness of the solution that you've got against business metrics, usage metrics, all the right relevant capabilities. That's an incredibly important aspect. And then as you said, Mike, once you've created it, you need to make sure that it's broadly consumed in a secure way, but it can't just be about security, because things that are locked down, nobody can use, that don't work. So you need to have a mechanism by which content can be pushed out there and then discoverable to other people in the organization that might be granted access to use it. So that's a great point too.
And Greg, you started talking a little bit about sort of measuring the success of these programs and these efforts that you're putting in. I'm curious to learn a little bit more about that and how you go about doing that, and how you ultimately say if something has been successful or not.
Well, first it starts with tying it back to the executive goals of the company, right? So if I'm going to make a change in the system, I want to have a positive ROI for my IT investment. And we've got a dollar value, whether it's internal or external resources, and a level of effort that we're going to apply to building a change in our ERP system, the Salesforce, or our analytics tool. And then that's got to be weighed against what's the benefit that I'm going to get out of it, right? It's going to grow margin, it's going to grow cycle time, it's going to grow revenue, and we really push the business champions to come up with those measurable results so that we can have a positive ROI on our IT investment, right? And like I said before, that's what really then separates certain opportunities or projects from others, because the ones with the sizable benefits that align to our executive goals are the ones that get the lion's share of the capacity in the team.
And Avi, how do you think about sort of success of these processes that you're putting in place?
For us, same along the lines of what Greg mentioned, we tie it closely to the business goals, so that the BI analytics team should think that their key goal is to help solve the business problems and not just deliver a dashboard or a report, right? And in the pursuit of doing so, they need to not just have the technical mastery over getting things done, but also spend good enough time to be a champion of the problem, understand the business, understand the domain, and come back with possibilities in terms of technical solution, in terms of the data that we have available. How can we do a deeper dive into identifying the challenges and opportunities in a much better way, so that our existing data gives us an edge in terms of competing with other players. And as we do that, it is very important to build that cordial relationship of a trusted partner with the business leaders of individual business units, and help them reach their goals and help them feel confident to move to a data-driven decision making, right? So those are our key goals, and that's why we take their feedback strongly about how do they feel their processes are. And of course, in terms of getting it done, then we also take care of collaborating with data engineering, with governance, with a few other teams, to make sure that our the end result is only as good as we all working together and taking ownership of data quality at all those steps.
So yeah, I think I think it's no secret, right, that the engagement with business intelligence and reporting and analytics in general is never sort of viewed in a positive light. I think it's something companies struggle with a lot. And you mentioned, Greg, your journey started with cleaning up the mess almost, right, of too many reports and dashboards. So I think what we're seeing, Marius, right, a lot of is, particularly in the last sort of 12 months with everything that's going beyond, and you talked about ROI and cost, being able to justify spend on these analytics practices is becoming more and more critical, right?
Yeah, we're seeing a lot of folks just basically zero out line items, instead of, and then say, oh, you got to re-justify, just like you were describing, right? Where instead of it might be a software purchase for 5 years, but not going to necessarily buy it this year until it can be fully justified. So everything in the budget has to be justified. And I think that's a new way that people are thinking about things.
Yeah, and I think as you think about sort of governance, I suspect that these sort of practices can help with driving engagement and therefore justification of BI spend and tools. I know a lot of our customers, whilst the ideal is tying it back to the business metrics, right? Is what I'm doing driving, business value? An interim step is really understanding sort of usage of what we're putting out there, right? Are we actually getting ongoing engagement with those tools? Maybe you can talk a little bit to how people are sort of measuring that as well, right? Engagement of content.
Yeah, I mean, I think that there's a very common, when people look at sort of I think there's two different dimensions, right? Engagement of the BI tools themselves, the BI infrastructure is, I think, a key thing. Mm-hmm. And it has been, remarkable to me that sometimes when we look at it with customers, that there's maybe up to half of the licenses and some of the BI tools are going unused, which is, if you think again about governance as effective stewardship of the resources that are available, that those are dollars that could go elsewhere. So that's sort of an opportunity. And then the other area is that it's not uncommon for things that were, what Greg described, lots of reports, lots of content that's been created to basically be there idle, where something was maybe relevant 6 months ago or a year ago, but that reporting is no longer relevant today, or it slightly missed the mark and it's not being used. And what we're seeing is that the organizations that are most effective with governance are ones that are continuously measuring the ROI that they're generating. So even beyond, like, we built it, now we're measuring into success, but what is the entire portfolio of out reporting that we have generating today from a usage perspective? What does that tell us and about how we should inform the allocation of resources, right? To be able to say, well, we did this initiative and it looks like it's not really getting a lot of traction. Not a lot of folks are using this. Well, maybe we need to relook at how we define the requirements for that. Go back and talk to the users to figure out why it was not successful. Having that feedback loop, that closing the loop, 3, 6, 9 months after a particular release has been made for a product, to understand how you can, whether it was truly effective or not, and how it can be improved is absolutely critical to having long-term sustained good utilization.
I apply the real black and white metrics, right? And I've had this conversation in the past 3 months, right? Spend $75,000 in salary to harness $50,000 of soft efficiency gains, or spend $75,000 in salary to reduce inventory levels by $3 million. The executive's going to go, I want option 2. Tell me more about that. Maybe what if I doubled your budget, but what could you do for me, right? Those are the engaging conversations, but you got to have the metrics on the ROI in terms of the IT investment hand in hand with the initiative you're analyzing.
Yeah, and I think, Greg, you've probably seen this as well. Oftentimes what people claim they can do up front and what actually gets generated are not necessarily the same. So to your point, you have to have the metrics.
I've counseled some of my business partners in that, and let's go conservative. Let's not shoot ourselves in the foot, but let's make it a number that we can both achieve and it's going to justify the investment.
And you mentioned sort of you started the conversation with sort of having the agility within the organization to sort of let people do what they need to do. I'm curious, with sort of the the discussion we've been having around ROI and cost justification, how do you balance that against that? And in terms of the content that gets created, right? If people are out doing their own thing, are you fine with that, or are you trying to then bring that back into sort of the governed set of content, so there's some management around it, and you're not creating a lot of mess out there that's hurting the organization?
Sure. On that, and echoing some of the points Marius and Greg talked about, is that it's very important that we are prioritizing on the right things, right? And if we are going to be the champions of helping our business leaders become data driven, we need to do it ourselves. And one part of that is we need to have deep insights into the consumption of our BI analytics content. Who's using it? How frequently are they using it? And more importantly, does it match the expectation with which it was built? And if it does not, we need to proactively act on it, rather than this discussion coming up because a business leader asked about it. Then it looks really bad on us. So we keep a close eye on the different solutions we build. We come up with sunset plans proactively when we see that the usage has dropped beyond a particular level. We try to reach out to some of the old users and see, proactively ask them questions that, hey, you were very prominently using this solution for last 3 months, but last 2 months you haven't used it even once. Is there a better solution, or the business problem simply does not exist? Because if that's the case, I would like to shut down the system and use my resources elsewhere. Right? I don't. Over time, we keep building new solutions, and they get pushed on to automation, but still we have a maintenance cost of keeping them up and running. And even though they are in automation mode, we do go and apply, once in a while, check them to make sure that the numbers are still reliable enough for business user to act on. Right? So in that cases, being data driven about the consumption of the content. And second one is a very, is the quantitative research, which we can easily get from the usage statistics. And the second part is the qualitative research, that once in a while, every few months, do a short survey to understand what are the key values, key parts of the content that are delivering the most value. And often the results can surprise you. Humans are creative. And often we would see that when the subjective feedback comes in, they are using our solutions a bit differently than what they were designed for, right? And those are opportunities for us to build on. We just need to make sure we have our eyes and ears open for that kind of opinion, and we have channels that it comes in on a timely basis, and there is a closed feedback loop that we adopt on basis of that, because it's not communication unless both the parties are speaking, right? So as much as we speak through our content, we also want to take the time to listen to make sure that what got communicated to the other end and was valuable.
Well, that's a great point, and I think that practice you just mentioned, that continuous cycle, is really important. I mean, I was thinking about this the other day. You would never expect to have a garden and not do any weeding, right? But somehow we in BI expect to just keep on creating content and not spend the time, sort of removing the weeds. And I think that's I think what you described is really something that I think
I'm having flashbacks to my garden every August.
I somewhere heard the quote that a gardener's job is only 20% time planting the seeds and 80% is removing the weeds.
Yes, that's exactly right. That's the right.
Yeah, I think BI has always become its own victim of its own success, right? Is you just end up creating more and more content, right? And I think I think the landscape as we're seeing it is becoming more and more fragmented in terms of the tools that organizations are using. The days of sort of one BI tool to rule them all, I think has gone. And I don't know whether you guys are seeing a lot of sort of uptake of departments investing in their own technologies to do BI and analytics. Are you trying to manage that centrally and standardize as much as possible on the underlying tools? How are things panning out in your organization, Greg?
I'd say I've been gifted with having a very simple standardized landscape, right? And then that starts with a single global instance of SAP, right? One instance of Salesforce, and I think between the two of them, that's probably where 80–90% of my data comes from, with a few cats and dogs out there. And that allows me to have a single data repository, both for transactional reporting and then another repository for KPIs and summary reporting.
Got it.
I think if we go back a minute or two to the conversation, we're talking about how things can evolve and where IT can play a role, right? I think where we can see that the weeds are growing and we can get engaged, we can help the business community, because it seems kind of counterintuitive, but we don't want to analyze things just because we can, right? That winds up becoming an ineffective time sink. And that's where IT teams can come in and turn that around to actionable insights and move the organization towards prescriptive and predictive analytics. And then, where there's volumes and patterns, we can even take it one step further using AI and ML.
Yeah, I want to build on that and maybe ask Abhi's perspective on this as well, and Greg, what you thought. I mean, we're seeing a lot of increasing use, leveraging of data science, like you said, and there's data science teams, and these folks are oftentimes using a completely different tool sets. They're not using the Tableaus and Power BIs, they're using the our Shiny applications, the Pythons, the things of that nature, to build their solutions. How have you sort of integrated governance into that part of your ecosystem, if you're seeing it rising within your enterprise?
Personally, I treat them like a skunkworks team, right? Kind of they it's a small group within IT, and they're allowed to do what they want with what they want, and eventually that might grow up and need something that's more industrial strength, or it might get rolled out into the larger tool set. But let them be as unencumbered as possible, so they can quickly develop something new, try something new, right? And keep as much governance out of the way for that group.
At my end also, we are very selective in choosing the business problems where we want to apply AI ML models on top of the BI applications. The reason simply being, even on the normal BI applications, we end up spending way too much time on data preparation and data quality than the true BI application as such, right? So what might look on paper as a really simple report took exponential time to generate, just because the governance or the data sources were all not aligned for it to be reported. But in some cases where these stakes are high and where the metrics are really important, that we need a predictive model and things like that, we do invest into AI ML. As we do that, my key philosophy principles are: one, to not keep machine learning as a black box, and as you explain the output to a business leader, also at a very high level explain the process that went on to generate the output, right? Because that gives some perspective as to what is the confidence interval, right? How much can they trust the numbers, etc., right? And with that also include a proper error margin to all the projections that you build in, because that's also a very important part. And a lot of machine learning models use a lot of assumptions. So it's very important to lay down those assumptions, because in the absence of those contexts, it is very likely that the output of a machine learning model will be misinterpreted, more likely by someone who's not tech savvy and who's more focused on the the business imperatives of the company. So that's a very key part of for us. And the second key part is of bringing in additional context, right? Because often what data scientists do is they are so narrowly focused on a problem that they will build a model, they will come up with the output, and they will share it. But for a business leader to consume it, you need additional context around it. So you need a few more data points from the past, maybe from competition, from industry, and a few other sources to put that into perspective and say that what does this mean for my business, and how much confidence do I have on these numbers? And if I want the model to do better, do I need additional data source? Do I need one more process? What else can be done? And I always try to make sure that the business leaders participate in that discussion, because I believe right now, machine learning is not at a stage where you can think of it as auto ML and then just feed in the output, trust whatever output comes from it, and start making decisions on top of it.
What are you seeing, Marius?
Yeah, I mean, we're seeing it kind of at various maturity models. Like Greg says, sometimes it is just a little, team on the side. And on other places, there's lots of larger organizations that are building this out. And I think that the ability to layer context is absolutely critical. And I think, especially creating a scenario where this content that gets created doesn't just sit out, I've created this insight, but nobody's really looking at it. It's not really being used, but that you really figure out how to operationalize the insights and then integrate them into a mechanism by which they're accessible to users in exactly the same way that they might use, a Power BI or Tableau dashboard, things like that. They've got to be equally accessible, which means they've got to understand, as Abhi said, what it's telling you, how to use it, the key parameters around it. They've got to know where to find it, and so I think it's got to. I think for us to really truly realize the benefits of all this data science investment, we've got to elevate the products to the same level as we have with the other BI tools, in my opinion.
I guess we have about 5 minutes left here. I guess my final question is a hot topic that seems to be coming up a lot in sort of the BI discussions, probably driven by the vendors as much as the customers out there, is around sort of self-service BI. And I think this sort of, from my perspective, this misnomer that everyone in the organization is going to become a BI analyst. I'm not sure that that's ever going to be the case, but I'm curious, if you're thinking about self-service BI and self-service analytics in your organization, and perhaps how that relates to what that actually means, and how you think about governance if that's a path you're going down. Maybe Greg?
I think I kind of went through the journey of the 3,000 reports and how we reduced that, and then getting to that blended of approach, right? Certain people in the organization have the keys to the car and can go in and slice and dice and drill down. Certain people in the organization have the right training and knowledge, and they're able to customize and create their own content. Certain people in the organization get a push mechanism, and we distribute the metric to them, and their job is just to read it and react to it every day, right? So it's not a one size fits all.
Absolutely. Avi?
At my end, we try to manage the both by, on one end, having a set of well-defined standard reports, which would be the common grounds for everybody to communicate and report on. But we are very cautious about what to include in that set, and we want to keep it at a at a level that we can manage with the existing resources in a good, reliable way continuously. Then the second part is, of course, this does not, the standard reports do not answer 85% of the ad hoc questions that business analysts from various business units have on an ongoing basis. So for them, we create a sort of data playground, right? Using one of the BI tools, so that through drag and drop, they can slice and dice data in any way. What we do ensure is that these data playgrounds are built on top of very standard and well-maintained data cubes or data marts, so that whatever number they use here would be reliable for the business use. So if there are some dimensions where the numbers are still fuzzy, we refrain them from these data marts, and they might still stay in the database, right? We only bring those things to this data playground where we are confident that if somebody looks at these numbers and uses them, they would not lead to any misinterpreted decision. And then we leave that playground for them. And often data playground is the highly used part of the BI solutions, simply because a lot of people just come over there, they drag and drop some, and they get the numbers they need, they export it to Excel, and they create their own charts on top of it. It gives them a wide range of their own customization, right? So we are not becoming the bottleneck.
The playground, they're not getting their job done, right?
Yes. I mean, right. The reason we think of it as a playground is because, right, often a lot of folks on the business side, right, particularly at manager, senior manager, director level, they would complain that, hey, if only I had this analytics inside, I would have done great things, right? So they try to put the spin on analytics rather than the business execution of a particular task, right? And that's why we want to make sure that, hey, even though we are focused on just a few standard reports, for the other reports as well, you have a self-service mode available. You will at least get the numbers. Now, how frequently you pull them, what numbers you pull, how you use them is completely up to you. But we make sure that the numbers are available and they have been vetted, so they are correct and they are aligned with these standard definitions.
And I think, Abby, you put your finger right on what we've seen as the sort of self-service has been kind of this thing bandied around, and it's been promised forever, and seldom is it delivered. And it's because of, I think, what you said, that you cannot have self-service without effective governance. Right? Yes. You have to have, it has to be, but whether you look at it from the end consumer perspective, I want a self-service report. Well, how do I know I can trust this report? How do you know it's been curated correctly? Or from the analyst perspective, I'm going to do my own self-service analysis. Well, how do I know that this data set is the certified data set that is in fact correct, and that I can use it as the basis for my analysis? And so I think, going back to that, you can think about self-service once you have governance. If you think about it before you have effective governance, you're sort of on a road to nowhere.
Yes. Before the governance, it seems like it would be it sounds like a utopian dream that every business user would know the data they are using and what it is telling them. But in reality, we know they don't. And that's where we need this governance to make sure that let's give them only the subset of data they can clearly understand. And there are minimum chances of, misuse or data abuse happening.
Yeah, absolutely. So I know we're coming up against time, and I've seen a lot of questions coming in on the chat channel here. So maybe, Vicky, we could transition into answering some of those. I think you've been tracking them, right?
And thank you for that great discussion. We are open to Q&A audience, so we encourage you to submit your questions through the chat feature, but we have lots and lots waiting. So I'm going to start with the first one that came in, and we'll go through them as quickly as we can. How did you handle the resistance to change? That came in kind of early on in the conversation.
Maybe that's for you, Greg, from the conversation you said about changing everything within the organization.
Yeah, the way I handle that is I work closely with the C-level executives. I get their buy-in. I get their buy-in to the benefits that we're going to get out of it, and then that kind of cascades down. If I start at the mid-level management and try to go up, there's a lot of extra churns there, and then that seems to work with a lot of the change management, whether it be BI or just business process change. So. I'm not saying, I make it sound very easily. It's probably a couple hundred conversations, right? But that's generally the approach. So.
When data is extracted from several systems, how do you ensure its integrity and accuracy?
Maybe Ari, do you want to
Sure.
have a shot at that one?
So for each aspect of data, we try to identify who are the subject matter experts of this area. We try to hold a few persons or teams responsible for that. And then, as I said, for the universe of data, we try to focus on the top 20%, which we say that, okay, we will standardize it, and this will be the main part of most of our reporting. For that, we do make sure that once we consume the data and just before publishing the reports, our numbers are matching with the SME's reporting. So we do put some automated, data verification steps to ensure that even though we are consuming data from multiple sources, before it becomes visible to a business end user, it does matches with whatever the SMEs of that area think are the correct numbers.
Another excellent question. In an organization where no data governance exists, what is the best way to start one? And where can I find a roadmap to data governance?
That's definitely, Greg might have some thoughts about that as well. I think it depends on the type of organization you have. I think, again, to Greg's original point, getting buy-in from senior management is very important. Data governance is not something that you just do kind of as a side project or sort of a fire and forget kind of a thing. I'm going to go do it now, and then I go back to my regular gig. You need resource. There needs to be budget for that. There should be staffing. There should be a commitment that the organization sees. So getting that buy-in before you do anything else from senior management to say that we understand what this is going to buy us in the long term from a value perspective. I think that's essential. And then there are various different methodologies. I mean, we have a whole roadmap on our site you can look at. There's lots of resources on the web you can find from various roadmaps and practices. There's people offering kind of trainings, things of that nature. So there's various mechanics, but I think getting the buy-in from management is most important.
Yeah, I mean, I can jump in here, and I can't talk about the best way. I can talk about a way, but at a former company, we had a very sizable ERP implementation on a global scale. It was implemented in 53 countries. And on the heels of that, we had a sizable BI implementation to support that. There was an enterprise goal to standardize the metrics across the company. And it became very apparent that in order to get the value out of those two implementations, data quality was important. And we had tremendous quality issues across customer, material, and vendor being the third. It really was customer material were the starting points for our sales organization and for our manufacturing organization. So we were able to stand up a dedicated master data management team with the governance and with the workflows and some other various tools that help to clean and then maintain the consistency of those data elements. And then that kind of from there grew to BI and the broader data governance, right? So that was a multi-year journey, but it started with, if we don't make this seed investment, we're not going to get the value out of the other two major investments that we've already made.
Is there anything you'd add to that?
I think you both covered it.
Okay, good.
Hello, do you have any recommendations on communicating training on BI resources for broader organization? Are there any best practices to increase engagement and utilization?
Maybe, Avi, you talked a little bit about this, I think, with your sort of feedback loop, right?
Sure.
Yeah.
So from my perspective, I would say if there is none, then a starting point is to do two things. One is to take a look at your usage and understand, does your usage align with your expectation? And the second, so that's the quantitative part. And then second would be to start adding things in the visibly in some part of your dashboard and report itself that takes the end user beyond the content of the report, right? You can say that start introducing did you know kind of facts, right? Interesting thing. Did you know what are our top 3 markets? Did you know where do we have the lowest margin, right? Did you know what is our top selling product? So these are very engaging questions which engage the user that, okay, now it's not just a bunch of charts. As soon as those questions come up, you become more interested in, okay, there is a business question. And then once in a while we do fun things such as, give them a business question, give them a dashboard. How long does it take for them to come up with different ideas to solve the problem based on the numbers they found in the dashboard? Because at the end of the day, the goal is not for them to just cram those numbers in the dashboard. The goal is for them to connect the dots between what is available in the dashboard and report to the business problem, and between that, of course, bring in their personality, their domain expertise, their creativity, and whatnot, and let the best ideas win. So communication and training is key. I think it's an incremental approach. Similar to Greg, I don't know any best practice. The approach we follow is an incremental one, and we evaluate incrementally, is it working or not? And it's very important to engage them on an ongoing basis, to conduct office hours and things like that, so that you have that closed feedback loop of what's working for them and what's not. And then adapt your strategy accordingly, right? Initially, you might think that your dashboard needs 5 sheets, but if you do end user engagement, you might later realize that doing those first 2 sheets really well has a much greater ROI than building 5 or 10 sheets, right? And then you'll be able to adapt that only if you have that feedback in the first place.
I think we might be up against time, Vicky.
So sorry we're out of time, but I wanted to thank you all again for being panelists, joining us today for this webinar. What an incredible discussion. And I'd like to thank all the attendees for joining us today for this fantastic virtual webinar. And thank you again, and enjoy the rest of your day.
Thanks.
Thank you. It was a pleasure.